Trauma Therapist Podcast, episode 436. All right, guys, welcome to the Trauma Therapist Podcast. My name is Guy McPherson. My mission is to raise awareness of trauma and to support new trauma therapists just starting out on their trauma-informed journey. I do that through this podcast and my membership community, Trauma Therapist 2.0. If you're a therapist of any kind, interested in learning about trauma, and you're looking for support and inspiration, I invite you to check out Trauma Therapist 2.0 by going to traumatherapist2.com. That's traumatherapist, the number 2.com. All right, let's get started. Several years ago when I was in graduate school and just starting seeing clients, I was doing a lot of commuting, like an hour and a half each way to my site. I was always thinking about my clients. What am I doing? I don't know what I'm doing. I don't know what the heck I'm doing. Why didn't I do that? Why I should have done that? And I always thought to myself, wouldn't it be awesome if I had a seasoned master trauma therapist sitting right there beside me in the passenger seat? Well, obviously that didn't happen. So I created the program, and it's Trauma Therapist 2.0. It's my online community specifically dedicated for new trauma workers. If that's you, if you're just starting out on this trauma-informed journey, you're passionate about this work, and you're looking to gain confidence, you're looking to share your journey, share your challenges, and share your wins to get inspiration, also to help to inspire others, I want to invite you to check out Trauma Therapist 2.0 by going to traumatherapist2.com. That's traumatherapist, the number 2.com. All right, guys, welcome back to the Trauma Therapist Podcast. Guy McPherson here, and very excited to be joined today in the special episode by Dr. Bruce Perry. Dr. Perry, welcome.
Thanks, Guy. Great to be back.
All right. So Dr. Perry is a child and adolescent psychiatrist and neuroscientist. He's senior fellow at the ChildTrauma Academy and an adjunct professor of psychiatry and behavioral sciences at Northwestern's Feinberg School of Medicine. In addition to having written more than 200 scientific articles, Dr. Perry has co-authored with Maia Szalavitz 2 books for general audiences: The Boy Who Was Raised as a Dog and Other Stories from a Child Psychiatrist's Notebook, and Born for Love, Why Empathy is Essential and Endangered. So, when this COVID-19, everything started hitting, I thought to myself, what could I do? And this is kind of what I do. And who do I want to reach out to? And, I'm not BSing you, but you were the first person who I thought of who resonates so powerfully, not only with the community of trauma and clinicians, but even in general with trauma. So I wanted to bring you on, and you're welcome. I want to bring you on and just talk. I have some questions, but I'll let you kind of jump in here and say something.
Sure. So, it's interesting because this, as all of us who do work in this field, we know a lot more about stress, distress, trauma, the way people think and function under duress than, the average person. It's part of what our training is, part of what we learn to understand. And it's one of the, I think in many ways, this global experience is ultimately going to be one of the most useful, teachable moments about stress, distress, trauma that we'll ever find, because there's going to be certain universal experiences that people are able to connect to, where when you're teaching people about, people under duress, for example, they shut down part of their thinking brain and they get more fearful and reactive, and the solutions they come up with are really not that smart when you actually reflect on them later on. And I think we're going to have literally hundreds of examples of that kind of state-dependent functioning later on. And of course, we see it at play, right? I mean, this is one of the things that you see, the hoarding with hoarding toilet paper. There's people that are sort of practicing extreme denial. And then there's people that are practicing almost paranoid behavior. And there's people who are illustrating tremendously callous behavior. And I think that there's a lot of people who are not understanding the complexities related to the rationale for social distancing, for example. They're not thinking of social distancing as a behavior that helps the group. Right. They're kind of thinking about, hey, why should I worry? I'm 18 years old and nobody who's 18 has died. And then they say it's like the flu. Right. They're not quite understanding that the rationale for social distancing is to slow down the rate of infection in the population so that it doesn't overwhelm the hospitals. But so there's going to be a lot of really useful things for our field ultimately. Yeah. And I start with that because I think it's really important for us as leaders in our local communities and in our sort of sphere of influence to begin to model more regulated behavior. One of the things that I think is important, and I've talked to a number of people in government official positions, both state and federal, about the importance that they get a hold of themselves, right? Mm-hmm. Listen, you got to calm down. You've got to be regulated. You've got to be clear. You've got to be appropriately cautionary, but not alarmist. Right. And striking that appropriate tone is a really important thing for the leader of any group, whether it's the teacher of a bunch of kids or the parents in a household, or us, as therapists who are now at this time, in many ways, we're leaders of the response that our community will have. So I think that, I like to remind people that this is going to pass. And there will be moments of reflection that will be positive. And now, with that said, there's a lot of real challenges between now and getting to that reflective moment. Right. And I think one of the biggest issues, and again, I think this is something that we as leaders in our sphere of influence can help people understand, is that there are ways to turn unpredictability and uncontrollability of the stress we're experiencing into something that's a little bit more digestible, into more moderate, predictable stress. There's just no way. It's going to be stressful. There's just no doubt about it. For some people, this is going to sadly be catastrophic. Most of us are privileged enough to have a job, maybe a little bit of savings, a place to live, but if you are sort of month to month and you've been experiencing poverty or marginalization as an individual in any way, this kind of event basically shows all of the fracture lines in our public system. Mm-hmm. And they're going to be, people will try to sort of, as they become apparent, there'll be little fixes here and there. But I think that the real challenge for us as a field is making sure that the people we work with, the most marginalized, most disenfranchised, are not forgotten in this process.
So you talked about, the importance of modeling and regulating. What are some of your thoughts on how people can do that for whom maybe that doesn't come very easily?
Yeah, it's interesting. I did a podcast for some folks who are basically an OCD foundation. And that's a very vulnerable population under circumstances like this because their baseline levels of anxiety are pretty high. And now we're telling people to do things that they're sort of been working to not do too much, right? Right. They've been working to not wash their hands too much and to not be phobic about going out and interacting with people. And so there's no doubt about it that there's some people that are much more anxious. And so a lot of the really good advice online in other places, I think makes a lot of sense. Number one, to the degree that you can, stop watching the news,
Right.
Literally structure your access to news, if you can at all, to, watch a news cycle in the morning and then watch a news cycle in the evening. And then if you want to get some sleep, stop watching the news at about 8 o'clock at night. Don't watch any, if you go to bed at 8, then stop watching at 6. Give yourself a couple hours before you go to bed where you're not actively bombarded by this content, even if you're well regulated. because it gets in ways that you don't really understand. And so the key things, I think, for people who are anxious is for us to remember what are the ways that we can actually people regulate. There's three sort of self-regulatory routes we have. Top down, which is where you use your cortex to say, oh, I don't need to get all nervous because the probability that I get this and I'm taking all these steps, and that doesn't work very well, honestly. It's sort of a cognitive predominant mode. Mm-hmm. And it particularly doesn't work very well with people who have baseline high levels of arousal and anxiety. I'm not saying don't do it, but you can't bank on that as the only way to kind of regulate.
Okay.
The second way is sort of bottom up. And these are the tried and true somatosensory things: taking a walk, listening to music, doing your art, but some sort of pattern, repetitive, rhythmic stuff. That's regulating. And so the key thing, and I think our field broadly doesn't appreciate this. And I think that this is going to be an important thing when we talk to the public, is that you're not going to be regulated over a 24-hour period if you just go for a 45-minute walk once a day. Mm-hmm. Walking is great, but what you need to do, take your long walk. That's fine. But you also need to get up every 30 minutes, 20 minutes, and do 5 minutes of walking, or you need to understand the concept of dosing. And so tiny little doses of regulatory activity is going to lower your baseline level of arousal. And so if whatever it is, whether it's 5 minutes of walking or 5 minutes of deep breathing, 5 minutes of some sort of, stretching and sort of a couple of yoga stances, whatever it is that you find regulating in a big way, you need to start dosing in little ways all through the day. And then, of course, this is the big challenge of this event. The major way that human beings really regulate is in context of other people, right? Mm-hmm. We sort of connect with the people who we belong to, right, and they make us feel better. And at the same time now, we're sort of telling people to distance and stay away. We even use the term social distancing, which is probably not, we shouldn't call it that. We should call it physical distancing. Mm-hmm. Because the reality is what we want to do is physically distance, but stay emotionally close. Mm-hmm. And that's where I think we need to be really intentional about little things like, use your phone. I know you might like to text a lot, but a text is great, but maybe make a phone call, 5-minute phone call to somebody. Take advantage of some of the new technologies like Zoom, Right. And I think that if we're intentional about that can be really important.
So you talked about, top down and bottom up in a sense. When you were talking about top down, and you were like, thinking about what this is not going to last too long, and that's one of the things that has really helped me, to realize that this is not going to last forever. Right. And I'm someone who does have kind of some anxiety. I'm able to control it, but what you've been talking about in terms of dosing, getting out, for example, or trying to regulate our body in the sense, that makes a lot of sense to me. Why is that important? Why is, just getting out once not as important or not as effective?
Well, it's not as effective because these systems that we have in our body, they're responsive to the moment, right? And so if you have 45 minutes where you're taking care of it and regulating those systems, and then you just sit in front of a computer and read the news for the next, 8 hours, you're going to get more and more and more and more dysregulated. And so that'll have been a positive thing, but it'll have been positive for maybe an hour and a half. Whereas what you want to do is if you have, a bunch of these little proactive doses, it keeps your baseline lower, so that when you do watch the news and you start to escalate a little bit, and then you'll break away and then have another regulating moment. And so it's all about sort of changing the pattern of stress activation from unpredictable and uncontrollable to more moderate and predictable. And one of the things that we talk about a lot, I know people have used the term toxic stress. We don't really use that term, but the key thing about stress and distress is that it really is something that is the pattern of stress activation is what turns out to be most important. And I've got a little thing here. I'm going to just, if you let me share the screen for a second, I'll show everybody. And I think some people are very familiar with this, but it's something that I think is really important to keep in mind. And that is that stress is not really a bad thing. It's just bad if it's present in these unpredictable, extreme, or prolonged ways. And part of what we're trying to do with these recommendations that I'm giving Guy is to take a person or a family or a community that might just sit in front of the television and worry, and they have no control over when they're going to see somebody in an ICU bed or what the next story is. They end up in this unpredictable and prolonged state where they get more vulnerable. Right. Whereas somebody who's able to sort of say, all right, we're going to have a schedule. I'm going to try to get up at the same time every day. I'm going to get my kids up, even though like they're going to go to school. When we do our homeschooling, little blocks of time, they're going to be dressed like they would at school. We're going to try to make sure that they have a structure that takes this unpredictability and makes it more predictable. And this becomes a tolerance. There's the difference between a sensitizing pattern of stress activation, which changes this blue line, which is your baseline, into a more resilience building pattern, which is what we're hoping to do. So, the truth is the degree to which we as clinicians are successful in communicating this to the people we work with, but also to the broader public, that will have a significant impact on the number of folks that end up over here versus the number of folks that end up here. And I'm completely convinced that we have the potential to really impact our communities by doing stuff like you're doing here, Guy. This, creating content that we're going to share with a lot of people, where they begin to creatively think about, all right, how do I bring structure and predictability into this stressful time? Mm-hmm. And what are the things that we can do as a family that are regulating? How do I take the things that help I know I don't want Billy on his video game all day long, but playing on video games is actually a regulating dissociative activity for a kid. And if they're stirred up, letting them play 15 minutes every couple hours, 20 minutes every couple hours, even though it's school time, might not be a bad idea. Right. And so dosing I think is the key to a lot of this stuff.
So this, when you put up that slide, that predictability kind of obviously stood out for me. I mean, this is something that is going on, here in California, as a lot of other states we have shelter in place. We're allowed to go out for walks, but we have to maintain 6 feet apart from people. But there's a certain amount of predictability to this high stress, stressful environment that's going on. Yeah. Can we find to me, I'm able to find comfort in that predictability.
Absolutely. One of the things, Guy, that is, we know from all the basic neurosciences and cognitive psychology and all kinds of different areas have studied this, but the unknown is more anxiety provoking than the known, even if the known is bad. Right. And you're basically describing, all right, we have a bad but known situation. And so I think that when government and government officials sort of impose structure, even though it's inconvenience and it's not great and it's stressful, that's healthier than kind of letting pandemonium take place and people decide for themselves what they're going to do or not do. Because that leads to sort of confusion and chaos and more distress.
Let me ask you a couple of questions here. I let some people know in my community that I was going to speak with you this morning, and some clinicians had some, I thought, really good questions that are a little more specific. One is by a clinician. Her name is Sandra Emanuelides, and she said, what can we do to help mitigate the high potential of trauma due to the public display of panic that teens and kids are witnessing in the current climate?
Yeah, I honestly, I think one of the easiest ways to do this, and it's important for everybody, is to not get yoked to the television or to social media. To just, I know it's hard. It really, there's a pull, especially when you're bored, right?
Right.
But to the degree that you can get people off of that kind of constant news cycle, I think that'll help. It's like turning the heat down on a burner. You'll just get a little bit more calming. That's one of the key things, I think, is media control. The other one is kind of what you said earlier, guys, that when you turn the heat down and people get a little bit more regulated, then they can hear what you're saying better. And then they can use top-down mechanisms. So give them reassuring scripts, right? That they can then use to reassure themselves in a top-down way, right? Give them, this is going to pass. You're going to be healthy, because the vast majority of people, even if you're older, are going to, if they get this, they're still going to be okay at the end. Mm-hmm. Some of them may get very sick. A very, very few of them may get very sick, but the vast majority of people will be physically okay. Now, I think a lot of people are nervous about stuff like housing, employability, my job, and I think the degree to which government can provide economic reassurance, that's also very helpful. And I have, I never really trust government, but it sounds as if most of the governments across Western Europe and the US and North America are saying that they're very intentional about trying to make sure that there's economic safeguards, that people are ultimately going to be okay.
Right.
So I think if we can just, again, give that message, not that we want to sort of be spokespeople for government, but say, listen, we're all going to take care of each other. It's going to, we don't know exactly how, but we're going to take care of everybody. This is what we have always done. We will always do this. For some people, it would be more obvious than others, but give people those cognitive scripts of reassurance, I think, is important. Now, the other thing that I think everybody, again, if you do clinical work, you're familiar with this phenomenon, but you're going to have to say the same things again and again and again and again. And people, because of that state-dependent functioning, right? Some people are going to be, the first time you say it, they'll hear it and they'll process it. But a lot of people who are so anxious, they're only processing a portion of what you're saying. That they're sort of cortically shut down. And the more regulated they get, the more they'll hear. But, they're going to exhibit fluctuating cognitive capabilities.
All right.
So,
what is that? You're kind of famous for saying regulate, relate,
and then
reason. Okay.
And that basically is sort of a recognition of the sequential processing of information in the brain. I mean, if you indulge me for one more second, I can. We've got a lot of images that sort of talk about this, but one of the things that we use a heuristic of the upside down triangle brain thing. And so the top is the cortex where you think, this is where your reasoning part of your brain resides, thinking about the future, reflecting on the past, speech and language. But what we know about the brain is that, it's organized so that all incoming information, and I think I have it, well, I don't have it here, but what we know is that all incoming information from the outside world comes into the brain down here. And it first gets processed in these lower parts of the brain, and then it gets processed in here, and then it gets to the top part of your brain. So when you're dysregulated, this is about, huge parts of your cortex are inefficiently processing. Mm-hmm. And so the idea is that if you're really going to engage somebody and interact with them, you need to recognize that, I think I've got one of these things in here somewhere, that if you are if you're wanting to communicate with somebody and you have some cognitive stuff up here, it has to go through the middle and emotional parts of your brain, out the dumb part of your brain, out into space, up through the dumb part of this person's brain, through the emotional part of their brain, and then the cognitive part of their brain. So there's a lot of steps in communication. And, we think that if you sort of acknowledge this sequence and follow this sequence, you're going to much more efficiently get to the cortex. So if you can quiet down these parts of the brain and regulate to a certain degree, which allows you to then effectively connect with somebody, which then means that they're actually going to hear more accurately what you're saying. So that's why we talk about, again, if you give a very sort of articulate explanation of the rationale for social distancing to somebody who's dysregulated, they're just not going to process it. And so we think regulation is the key to communication. That now the other part of this, and Guy, you know this very well, is that human beings are, and you've talked, I'm sure, this has been an issue in almost every one of your dialogues with folks, is that if you are, human beings are relational creatures. And so if you as the adult or parent or therapist are dysregulated, you're just not going to effectively communicate with anybody. And so the idea is that we as therapists, we have to get a hold of ourselves.
Right.
And the degree to which we're regulated is going to sort of linearly be related to the degree to which we'll be effectively regulators for the people we interact with.
Yeah.
And so anyway.
Love that. Another quickly, I just want to be responsible to your time here. Ann Mangus in Davis, she works with homeless youth who are living in chronic trauma. She's wondering how best to support kids' mental health during this time who are already living in stressful situations.
Yeah. Well, here's where I want to send a hopeful message that, again, this is related to dosing. Here's the thing that we know. Now most of us are sort of trained in the traditional healthcare model where, 45 minutes once a week, or we have an hour contact with a client and that kind of stuff. But the truth is, meaningful doses of therapeutic contact only have to be seconds long. So if you have a youth you're working with and you're used to seeing them once a week and you can't see them, if you text them a couple times during the week and you call them and talk for 5 minutes, that tiny little reaching out and dosing is actually going to be like a lifeline. And it doesn't take a lot of time. We just because of the way we're organized, we for years have been using and doing web-based communication, e-communication. I had a client who had OCD, who wouldn't leave his house, who I never saw in person, and I worked with completely from a distance. And he ended up getting well enough to leave us. It's not because of me really, but you can do therapeutic work using these tiny little doses. And I can't tell you how powerful it is for a kid to basically get a sort of an unsolicited text where you say, I've been thinking about you, I hope you're fine, reach out if you need anything. And what did that take you? It took you like 45 seconds to type that and send it. That kid feels he's seen. He feels like that, wow, they're thinking about me. That's powerful. And so those are the kinds of things that you can do as a therapist without having to sort of physically be present with your client. And I would recommend that everybody who's doing this work, make sure that you have the phone numbers and ways to connect with these kids that may have phones or so.
Yeah. As you're saying that, I just can't help but think how that just ripples out, not just in the therapeutic environment, but to all of us as humanity. There's that touching base. My wife had a conference this last Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday up in Yosemite. We got home and there was a little note on our door. So in the midst of us being in Yosemite, all this stuff had hit really hard. We got this note on our door from a neighbor who said, "I just want to let you guys know that I'm here for you." And this is a woman that, we don't really have that much contact with, but we
Right.
see her, and it was very powerful. I think it's speaking to a lot of what you're saying.
Absolutely. And I think that's, these little moments of human connection are really powerful. That's what weaves social fabric. And social fabric is what makes families and communities capable of dealing with events like this.
Right.
And so the more that we sort of model doing that with each other and for the families and kids we work with, I think the more it's going to have that ripple out effect, just like you say, Guy.
All right. Last one here by Kristen Free. She says, any suggestions for how to support teenagers who aren't able to process the severity of the situation and just want to be able to be with their friends?
Yeah, it's interesting. We have two groups of folks that we're struggling with. One is that there's a lot of kids who are sort of, in the developmental disability world who don't quite understand why mom and dad can't come and visit anymore. And so their processing that's hard. And we're struggling with that. We don't really have great answers to that. But if a kid is, if you're an adolescent and you've got normal processing capabilities, one of the things that we're just going to have to keep doing is re-explaining. And I think some of the most powerful ways to help them understand the rationale for some of this is use some of the graphic visuals that are available online. There was a very compelling set of video clips that modeled social distancing that was published initially, I think, in the Washington Post. It's available online. Barack Obama retweeted it, but it basically shows a series of scenarios where there was no social distancing and there was one person with the infection, and it showed how it spread. And then there was another one that showed moderate social distancing, and then and really what it was a visual representation of the rationale for social distancing. And that's kind of what what I would recommend. That there's a lot of people who are much more visual. And I think when most folks, if you send them an article where people are writing about, those millennials and how bad they are because they're not social distancing, it doesn't go anywhere. So.
All right. Well, look, man, I want to thank you so much for taking the time to do this. Sure. I'm so glad I followed my instinct and reached out to you. Again, thanks for the work you're doing and for the inspiration that you are. I appreciate it.
Well, thanks for the opportunity. And, stay distant, but physically distant, emotionally close.
All right. Take care, Dr. Perry.
You bet. Bye-bye.
Several years ago when I was in graduate school and just starting seeing clients, I was doing a lot of commuting, like an hour and a half each way to my site. I was always thinking about my clients. What am I doing? I don't know what I'm doing. I don't know what the heck I'm doing. Why didn't I do that? Why I should have done that? And I always thought to myself, wouldn't it be awesome if I had a seasoned master trauma therapist sitting right there beside me in the passenger seat? Well, obviously that didn't happen. So I created the program, and it's Trauma Therapist 2.0. It's my online community specifically dedicated for new trauma workers. If that's you, if you're just starting out on this trauma-informed journey, you're passionate about this work, and you're looking to gain confidence, you're looking to share your journey, share your challenges and share your wins, to get inspiration, also to help to inspire others, I want to invite you to check out Trauma Therapist 2.0 by going to traumatherapist2.com. That's traumatherapist, the number 2.com.